we re-experience that quality of awareness, as we all sometimes do, we might call it innu- um, intuitive. Okay, intuitive. But throughout our life, since infancy, our brain cells have been developing countless patterns and sequences that more clearly separate, define, and secure our sense of self. Brain cell patterns involve functional systems throughout all parts of the brain: memory, thought, body, senses, visual images, and everything. Thus, our self images, whatever we feel is me at a given time, are in fact cellular representations of self. By the time we become adults, we have hundreds, perhaps thousands of these self representations at work. Others when we are at play, still others as parents, spouses, and all the other roles and circumstances within which we may pause to notice. Beneath the variety of self representation systems, we sense something more constant, a vague awareness of me-ness. Me-ness. Me. Semicolon. Not semicolon. Hyphen. Ness. Sorry. The constancy allows us to feel we are ourselves no matter what particular role we may be playing at any given time. For the most part, however, we pay no attention to the underlying constancy. Instead, we act on the basis of our varied self representation systems, changing from one to the other in accord with our roles and situations. If we are fairly well adjusted psychology, psychologically, there we go. Our different systems will be generally harmonious and easily interchangeable. We can shift flexibly from one to the other. If not, we may have to expand considerable energy to keep them from warring with one another. I could rewrite this book in like a version that's simpler to understand. This is really wrecking my brain. I'm sorry. Sorry, I said that. I'm loving the reading of this book. I really am. But let's just say it's harder for me because I was never good in science or biology or, you know, I don't. So a lot of this stuff I'm having to like Google and study on it. Okay. Anyways, back to the book. My bad. If we look at the makeup of our self representation systems, it is obvious that they are intimately associated with our addictions. The strongest components of any self representation, the ones that are most important, are the adaptations other systems have made to that particular role. When I sense myself as a writer, for example, my self representation is associated not only with simple memories and hopes of writing, but more strongly with my attachments to writing, the ego issues of being considered an authority, and desires and fears associated with success and failures, competitiveness, and the like. Attachments come to the forefront of my self consciousness because, whether I like them or not, they have entrenched themselves as significant. I want to see myself as a writer who is simply living out a few of God's gifts gracefully. But what I really see is my attachments. I could say similar things about my images of myself as a father, as husband, as man, as spiritual pilgrim and lover of God, or any other self representational system. We all define ourselves according to our addictions. If I were to ask you to tell me about yourself and you replied honestly, you would tell me about your attachments. And if you weren't honest, even that would be because of your attachments. Ideally, our self representation systems should function as expedient tools for us. They help us understand our own unique personalities. They differentiate us from one another. Yes. Let us know, from one another, and let us know where our own character stops and where someone else's begins. These self discriminations are necessary for us to live efficiently, and they can also help us appreciate the wonder of our own being. But not only are our self-representations systems strongly determined by addiction, they also become objects of attachment themselves. Some self-images we want to cling to, others we abhor. As in any other addiction, when we become addicted to our own self-images, they begin to control us. For example, I am seduced by and enticed by a certain image of myself as a whole, holy, loving man who is well on his way to becoming free from attachments. When this image comes up in my prayer, it causes me to pose and posture. I find myself trying to make my prayer fit my image of how a holy man would pray. I no longer really invite God into my prayer. It becomes an act, a scene I play out on my own stage for my own edification. God is there in spite of this silliness, but for the time being, I am unaware of that saving fact. So we become addicted to our own self-images, our cellular representations of self-habituate, habituate, adapt, and control us. In the course of homecoming, addictions to self-image also must be lightened. They must be relinquished in the cause of freedom. As I understand it, this is the neurological meaning of losing oneself to find oneself, and dying to be reborn. As with other addictions, we do not readily relinquish our attachments to self-images. In fact, we may cling to them more tenaciously than to any other attachments. Although the process of relinquishment is really only a matter of easing the power that certain self systems have over our sense of self, it can indeed feel like death. If we examine our experience with self-representations, however, we may find reassurance in the fact that we already, and very naturally, experience their coming and going, their death and rebirth, countless times each day. We have so many self-representations, and they are almost constantly changing. They dance around in accordance with our circumstances. First one comes to prominence in our awareness, then another, then still another. Viewed from this perspective, it is difficult to believe how desperately we try to cling to them. Even more surprising and reassuring is the frequency with which our self-representations disappear from awareness entirely. In the brain, their disappearances are characterized by pauses in the normally hectic firing and self-defining systems, as if the cells all just happen to take a breath and rest for a while. Our interior experience at such times is one of self-forgetfulness or self-transcendence. For a moment, we are relieved of bondage to who we think we are, and we can simply be. Usually these moments are very brief, because the systems of our brain start to experience withdrawal and quickly reestablish their normal conditioned patterns. Thus, although pauses in self-definition may happen thousands of times a day, they happen so quickly that most of them go unnoticed. Occasionally, however, they are prolonged. At these times, we appreciate their spaciousness and freedom. We experience wonder and awe and a kind of sacred remembrance of what our awareness was like when we were very young. These times of just being remind us of home. We call them spiritual or u- unitive, unitive. That's the word. Unitive. Unitive. Okay. Unitive. That's how I'm going to pronounce it from now on. Okay. The next section is called The Experience of Heart. Such pauses in self definition are like moments when a cloudy sky breaks clear. If only for an instant we catch a glimpse of the spaciousness that always exists behind the clouds. There, in that pure and indefinable blueness, we get a sense of what the sky is really like. Similarly, when the clouds of our self images clear for a moment, we catch glimpses of something that is constant behind our ever-changing representations of self. This underlying constancy of self does not change with our different roles, nor does it seem to be influenced by any particular characteristics. It also seems amazingly hold on. It also seems amazingly elusive, disappearing just as we try to grasp it, hiding when we seek it, disappearing again when we least expect it. We find ourselves becoming a bit anxious if we try to look too closely at our interior constancy, precisely because it is so indefinable. We are apt to want to call it our true self, the real me, but to call it me never seems quite right. For for it fits into none of our other systems of self-representation. It it permits of no particular neurological associations, except perhaps except perhaps with some memory similarly vague and indefinable of home. We cannot hook it to this or that. We cannot give it an adequate name. We cannot control it. We can avoid awareness of it, but it never bows to our will. Therefore, though it haunts us beautifully and calls us sweetly, we do fear it. If we are given the grace to spend some time with this mysterious constancy, just gently letting it be what it is, we may find a strange confidence, even security, growing out of it. Here is something solid, some foundation of self that is invulnerable to any other experience, unaffected by anything else that might happen to us. It has something to do with just being aware and alive, for we notice it when we notice our own attention. In fact, we notice it most precisely when our attention has been temporarily captured by an attachment and then returns to some central position of pure awareness. In the return, we feel a sense of security, for whenever our attention goes away and then returns, the presence at the center is still there, unaffected, unchanged, and somehow free. As nearly as I can tell, our core is what Hebrew and Christian spiritualities have called heart. It is the aspect of oneself that is not only one's own center, but also where one can be in closest, most directly feeling contact with the presence of God. I'm so sorry. And it is meant to be the center of our will, the nucleus of all choice and action. Okay. Further, it is where we realize our essential unity with one another, with all God's creation. Yet this heart sense does not want to be pinned down, even with contemplative concepts. The heart does not seem to be quite oneself, nor quite God. In the same way that it refuses to associate with any of our conditioned images of self, it does not fit any of our images of God. Thus, it remains continually frustrating, and we will always find ourselves deeply unknowing in the face of it. The problem is that this heart sense is so spacious, it seems to have no bounds, no qualities, no form. It is conditioned and unconditional. It has no objective attributes that we can grasp and relate to other systems. Since we can neither make an adequate cellular representation of it nor incorporate it into our pre-existing systems, we cannot adapt to it. Like God, and perhaps in the image of God, our deepest sense of self-will will never be normal, because our brains are used to dealing with normalities that have boundaries and qualities. The spaciousness, its beckoning security and confidence, notwithstanding, is terrifying. So we are likely to pull away, perhaps even with vengeance, and thrust our attention back into the world of form and substance where we can define ourselves. Here, though our addictions bind and frustrate us, we at least think we know who we are. We are in the world of our normality, the conditioned world to which the cells of our brain have adapted. But we have been touched by this other, deeper sense, and it will touch us again. It will touch us again. It has awakened and appetized our spiritual hunger, and part of us will forever want to go back for more. We can occupy ourselves with other things, but there will always be times of rest, moments of pause, and there will be beckoning. Next section is called spiritual growth. Spiritual growth. Given enough experiences of pauses in self-definition, we may come up with the partial solution. During the experiences themselves, this heart sense is completely ungraspable. But afterward, we do have a memory of the experience. And with this memory, we can make an image, a representation. We can give the image a name, just as I have done in this discussion. We can say it is heart, center, true self, experience of closeness to God. We can then associate this cellular representation with our previous images of God and self and begin to build a framework of spiritual understanding around it. Our representation, of course, will never be the thing itself, but it does help us reflect upon it, communicate about it, and otherwise dance about its edges. If we are halfway authentic in our searching, we must take time in silence, in prayer and meditation, like other normal human pilgrims. We will spend most prayer time playing with our spiritual images and representations. But within the spaces created by our attempts to be quiet, there will always be moments when we find ourselves opening once again into the reality. Then we will be reminded, if grace gives us the courage to admit it, that we have been chasing images instead of truth, perhaps even worshiping our representations as if they were idols. After each such reminder, we will come away with yet another memory representation, perhaps more sophisticated than those that went before. By now we may have learned to make such images readily. We may even made a habit of it. We know there is some deception and distancing in this, but we are simply more comfortable dealing with the with our images than directly facing the awesome, uncontrollable reality those images represent. As time goes on, and with grace, the representations we make of spiritual reality will become less and less solid. Their qualities and boundaries will become more vague. As this happens, we will discover that we can exist without clinging to our images so desperately. Our clutching, grasping hands begin to relax. From the standpoint of neurology, relaxing means a greater flexibility of sequences and patterns among cell systems. We have less need to immediately associate all our experiences with preset representations to make them a fit. We are a little more willing to be unknowing and to be surprised. Slightly more often, more of the cells of our brains may simply register a sensation rather than so quickly having to habituate and adapt to it. Psychologically, we are becoming a little more willing to let things be what they are. Spiritually, we are becoming a little less attached. Freedom is happening. There is a strange sadness in this growing freedom. Our souls may have been scarred by the chains with which our addictions have bound us, but at least they were familiar chains. We were used to them, and as they loosen, we are likely to feel a vague sense of loss. The things to which we were addicted may still be with us, but we no longer give them the ultimate importance we once did. We are like caged animals, beginning to experience freedom, and then there is something we miss about the cage. Like the Israelites in the Exodus, we know we do not want to go back to imprisonment, and we sense we are moving on to a better existence, but still we must mourn the loss of the life we had known. I'm going to read that sentence again. Where's it at? But still, we must mourn the loss of the life we had known. This poignant grief, yet somehow soft and gentle, with time it will grow into compassion. Compassion for the spiritual imprisonment of our sisters and brothers, and compassion for the many parts of ourselves that still remain in the chains of addiction. Grief and compassion are part of spiritual growth, the homeward pilgrimage from imprisonment to freedom, the homemaking of deepening love. It is important to note that the spiritual growth process involves far more relinquishment than acquisition. In our culture, we are conditioned to expect growth to involve acquisition of new facts and understandings. To put it neurologically, the function systems of our brains are used to logically hold on.